Book Talk begins at 13 minutes and 47 seconds. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 619, Attend the Tale. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by its listeners. Well, hello, how are you? I am so overwhelmed by the awesome of Sweeney Todd on Broadway, the revival, with Josh Groban, who is marvelous. My God, that man's voice. And Annalee Ashford, who we've actually seen in a bunch of different things before, but never anything that allowed her to highlight both how amazing her voice is and how awesome her comic timing is, and also how dark she can get. Sweeney Todd, if you're not familiar with it, was originally sort of a Victorian Penny Dreadful kind of horror story about the demon barber of Fleet Street, a guy who was cutting people's throats in his barber chair, and then the woman who owned the pie shop downstairs was having trouble getting meat. And so it seemed a worthwhile business partnership to them. And it's horrifying. And boy, did they thread that needle amazingly well. If you have any opportunity to get to New York to see Sweeney Todd, please do. And I am of two minds about what I am about to tell you. I understand intellectual property and copyright law and all of that. And the threats to creators and writers with the way that the internet works is not a small thing. However, not everybody can afford Broadway, and not everybody can afford to get to Broadway. And as a theater person, that makes me sad because I find really good theater experiences to be so transcendent, and you know, they just make the world seem a little bit bigger and a little bit more friendly because you're in a theater with a whole bunch of people who are laughing and crying at the same things as you. You don't know any of them. They could be totally, utterly different from you. It doesn't matter. You're all laughing and enjoying the same thing. If you cannot get to Broadway to see shows, and you go to YouTube and you look up the name of the show that you're interested in and add the words, I'm not joking, slime, S-L-I-M-E, tutorial, there is an excellent chance you will find a surreptitiously recorded version of the show. The quality will be meh, but you will be able to see it, sort of. Obviously, no question, much better if you can go to the theater yourself. But if you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, and especially for kids who've been stuck in the middle of nowhere, who haven't found their people, and all they need to do is find theater people, I actually think the slime tutorial thing is good. It's hard to say that out loud, but there it is. So yes, there are clips of Josh Groban as Sweeney Todd on the UB2B. So if you're interested, now you know. But of course, me being rabbit hole woman, I looked up clips from Sweeney Todd, the way that I just described to you. And then the next thing that popped up on my feed because of that was the new, in air quotes, it's been running for a little while, the new Little Shop of Horrors revival. The newest Audrey, the Suddenly Seymour Audrey, is so gorgeous and has such an extraordinary voice. I'm actually linking out to an official clip from that show, one where she sings Somewhere That's Green with Alan Menken, and the look on Alan Menken's face at the end is just heartwarming. But then also a clip that they did as a promotional clip for this cast change, because she is the new one. Joy is replacing the former Audrey as of, I think, early May. And so they did a promotional video where you can see the whole cast that is involved in the scene doing Suddenly Seymour. And it is fantastic and official. So there's that. Oh, and if you're not sure why I called this episode Attend the Tale, it is because those are the first words of the first song in the Stephen Sondheim musical, Sweeney Todd. Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd. I am not a baritone, so it doesn't work as well. But I also cannot get that song out of my head. It's been a couple of days, and I cannot get it out of my head. The cast is incredible. The other part of the cast, which I didn't mention before, is Gaten Matarazzo, who you might know better from his part as Dustin on Stranger Things. Now, this kid's been around for a long time. He did some Broadway show earlier, but the thing that got him known was playing Gavroche in Les Mis. And according to a British reviewer, his is the only accent that even comes close to accurate. So way to go, Gaten. Just an incredible performance as Toby. What else do I have for you? Oh, a new Mel Robbins episode that dropped a little while ago. She is interviewing Dr. Amy Shaw. She is double board certified medical doctor. She was trained at Cornell and Harvard and Columbia. She has both a degree in nutrition and an MD. So she's a slacker. And the reason that I bring it up is because, as you know, if you have followed the show for a while, I had to stop eating wheat like 12 years ago, and or more, actually. And it's always been kind of mysterious to me how that happened, because I don't have celiac, but I definitely get a weird brain fog and pain and stomach pain if I eat bread or anything that has wheat in it. Right after that happened, and my mom diagnosed me, there was an article in the New Yorker magazine talking about our stomach and our biome, our gut biome, all of the beneficial bacteria, thousands of beneficial bacteria that we have in our digestive system. And that because of things like Roundup and other pesticides and the overprocessing of foods, a lot of us have been eating a lot of things without knowing it that have killed off some of that biome. They've killed off some of the bacteria. And in that article, 10 or 12 years ago, they were very clear that we didn't even know, before we killed them off, what the bacteria were doing. But clearly, they had been doing something that was important, because the rise of gastric issues has continued since the post-war era, when you started to get prepackaged, super processed food. And as Aiden has said vociferously, and so I am stating it here for them, there are food deserts. There are restrictions on government subsidies for food that make it almost impossible for poorer people in this country, in the United States, to eat healthily. The overprocessed food that is doing damage, this isn't news, is cheaper. It's like Kraft macaroni and cheese and Top ramen. You can't beat it when you're in college, but you also really can't make that a diet for you for the rest of your life, or for children. And the kind of problems that malnutrition and non-nutrition make for people's systems it's massive. The reason I bring this up, because I know that none of that's news to you, it's because apparently in the last 10 or 12 years, they've managed to do a bunch of research on the connection between what's going on in your gut biome, and the way that the chemicals that your digestive process creates, things like dopamine and serotonin and certain enzymes that travel to the brain and communicate with the brain, it goes beyond, oh, I'm hungry, or, oh, I'm craving chocolate. It goes into, they didn't put it this way, but we know that phones and apps and things like that are gamified. We get a like on Instagram and we get a dopamine hit. It makes us feel good. And so you crave more. And of course, as with anything that is kind of addictive like that, the more you are craving something, the more you are having something, the quicker you become acclimated to it, and the more you need to get that same dopamine hit. This is how you get addicted to things like sugar. So our diet has, in a similar way, gamified our appetites. And that, to me, was revelatory, because I am really not interested in having a nutritionist say, yes, these foods are bad for you, don't eat them. Because you know you're going to at some point, whether because you have to, it's the only food you can get access to, or because some days you're just going to need a piece of chocolate. The thing that I loved about this interview, and it's long, and you can listen to it at like 1.5 times on YouTube, and there are time codes in the show notes underneath the video. So you can skip around to the stuff that you think is going to be most interesting to you. But I recommend that you have a piece of paper next to you, because there's new information, new to me anyway, that I had to write down. But the thing that I loved about this particular episode was that Dr. Amy gave one, I thought, paradigm shifting piece of information within the first third of the video. And it was this: what's the difference between hunger and craving? If you feel hungry, like, oh, I want something to perk me up, I want a snack, and you're craving something like a sugary snack or caffeinated snack or anything that we know has potentially deleterious effect on our system, the question to ask yourself is, am I so hungry that I would eat a bowl of vegetables right now? And if the answer is no, then this is a craving that your brain has manufactured because it wants dopamine. To me, that just rocked my world. I have no idea if it interests you or not, but I thought I'd share because holy cow, if it helps even a few people kind of get a handle on what's going on with food certainly in the United States. It is not as big a problem in other countries. Congratulations, you're lucky if you live there. Here, it is a massive problem, and it's a systemic problem. It is not something that is going to be easily fixed, because the food lobby industry in the United States, they don't talk about this at all in the video, is massive. So yeah, so I'm spreading the word. I'm evangelizing the bowl of vegetables thing. Okay, but the book, right? I have 2 fabulous chapters for you today, chapters 12 and 13. The things that I wanted to go over with you before we start: do not forget, we left off with the Duke of Buckingham, and he's going to be now officially escorted into the Louvre, where he is going to see the Queen, he hopes. At the same time, don't forget that the guards thought they arrested D'Artagnan, but actually they took Athos. And Athos, on purpose, did not disabuse them of the notion that they had gotten D'Artagnan, because he wanted to give D'Artagnan some time to finish doing whatever it was he needed to do. So that comes into play in today's chapters. There's a description of Anne of Austria that comes early on in the chapter. I've put a picture of Anne of Austria. Actually, Jemuel has put a picture of Anne of Austria in the show notes. She is very pretty. She really is. There's a comment about her hair, that her hair has become more of a chestnut brown, and she wears it powdered. And it occurred to me, I don't think we've talked about this before. We've talked about Bernadette Banners. I've mentioned Abby Cox. There's this whole community of like costume and clothing and hair historians who are on YouTube, and they do fabulous work. They combined forces and did a demo of how to create an 18th century hairstyle. It's, I think, 26 minutes long, and it's a beautiful, mellow video. And it made so much sense, finally. All of the pomading and the powdering and the this and the that and the whatever. Wow. I've linked to it because if you've been confused in the past about like, why would you do that to your hair? Now you'll know. And it wasn't stupid. And it wasn't because they didn't have anything better to do. They certainly were capable of washing their hair. And they did. But for lots of reasons, the pomade and the powder thing really worked well. So if you're interested, you can go watch that. I have linked to that as well. Okay. There are some of the most funny interchanges, just like last week, where we had, anytime you got a lot of dialogue, you've got a lot of opportunity for Dumas to be, again, very, very modern feeling in his humor. And there's a bunch of it in the chapters today. We will review some of those in the meantime, but I want to play you an audio clip from The Importance of Being Earnest to prepare you for a particular joke that comes up. So this tiny clip, we'll listen to more of it later, but this is a conversation between John Worthing, who is also Ernest, and Lady Bracknell, who is hilarious and often played by men because she is just, yeah, you'll get it. This particular clip is John Gielgud as John Worthing and Edith Evans, who is a spectacular Lady Bracknell. So here we go.
Now to minor matters. Are your parents living?
I have lost both my parents.
To lose one parent, Mr. Worthing, may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness.
Okay, so that setup and payoff happens a couple of times in today's chapter. The one that really made me think of this particular scene from The Importance of Being Earnest comes in our second chapter. Our first chapter today deals with the Duke of Buckingham, and our second chapter deals with Monsieur Bonacieux, which, remember, Dumas told us, even if D'Artagnan forgot, we wouldn't. And we get to see some awesome comedy in that one. And for your reference, all of the descriptions of Anne of Austria and the Duke of Buckingham are historically accurate enough, as is a reference to Anne of Austria having all of her Spanish ladies in waiting having been dismissed. The cardinal put a bug in the king's ear, therefore the king thought he couldn't trust any of these women around his wife, and she got more and more isolated. She had a very sad, certainly early life, and she's only about 26 at this point. The Duke of Buckingham, though, is such a player. Holy cow, does he work it? This is an extraordinary scene, which includes him talking about what is soon going to be the siege of La Rochelle. He is the one who's going to be setting it up with the Protestants. And he has very good Anne of Austria reasons for doing it. Not good reasons, but good if his point is to get access to her. And he explains that. But he also makes it very clear that he really, obviously doesn't care about anybody but himself. But he's also not afraid of saying how little he values anyone else's life. He just does it in a very funny kind of statement because Dumas is a genius. Dumas also threw in a thing where it sounds like the two of them have had the same dream. And so there is something that we're supposed to feel like, well, geez, maybe this is actually legit. Maybe there really is something between them more than just him manipulating her, which was a smart thing for Dumas to throw in there. There's a reference to Holland and his lover. This was a real guy. He really was in love with a woman in Queen Anne's ring of women, all the ladies in waiting and the women who had all the jobs surrounding the queen. It was a scandal. It did not go well for the lady, but the interesting thing is Holland stuck with her. And so they wound up having an okay time of it. Queen Anne's response to him kind of pushing like, hey, other people have done this and they're fine. Actually, they're not so fine is also accurate. In our second chapter today, chapter 13, again, just such great dialogue. The guy who is interviewing or interrogating, interrogate me, I entreat you, is one of the things that Monsieur Bonacieux says. The commissary or commissioner is the one doing the interrogating. He is described as looking somewhere between a polecat and a fox. And if you're not familiar with polecats, they're actually closer to dogs. But it turns out that pretty much every continent has their own polecat. They're all very different. Sometimes they look a little more like thin raccoons, but mostly they look like ferrets. And so this is calling him both ferret-faced and fox-faced at the same time because he is sly. But the description then goes on to talk about how his neck coming out of his shirt collar looks like a turtle extending its neck from under the shell. This is not an attractive man. And his logic is part of the comedy and also where the Lady Bracknell scene comes in. The parallel to the Lady Bracknell scene comes in for me. Also, last thing, do know that all of the locations that are mentioned at the end of chapter 13, it's like the last page and a half, they're driving through town and very specific locations are mentioned with the history of those locations. All accurate. All right, whew. Okay, let's listen to chapters 12 and 13 of Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers. And if you are listening to the alternate audio, the Tantor recording that is narrated by John Lee, who does these chapters beautifully, time code to start listening to the post-chapter audio is 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 31 seconds. All right, let's have at it. Here we go.
Chapter 12 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This Sleepervox recording is in the public domain. George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham. Madame Bonacieux and the Duke entered the Louvre without difficulty. Madame Bonacieux was known to belong to the Queen. The Duke wore the uniform of the Musketeers of Monsieur de Treville, who, as we have said, were that evening on guard. Besides, Germain was in the interests of the Queen, and if anything should happen, Madame Bonacieux would be accused of having introduced her lover into the Louvre. That was all. She took the risk upon herself. Her reputation would be lost, it is true, but of what value in the world was the reputation of the little wife of a mercer? Once within the interior of the court, the Duke and the young woman followed the wall for the space of about 25 steps. This space passed, Madame Bonacieux pushed a little servant's door open by day, but generally closed at night. The door yielded. Both entered and found themselves in darkness, but Madame Bonacieux was acquainted with all the turnings and windings of this part of the Louvre, appropriated for the people of the household. She closed the door after her, took the Duke by the hand, and after a few experimental steps, grasped a balustrade, put her foot upon the bottom step, and began to ascend the staircase. The Duke counted 2 stories. She then turned to the right, followed the course of a long corridor, descended a flight, went a few steps farther, introduced a key into a lock, opened a door, and pushed the Duke into an apartment lighted only by a lamp, saying, "Remain here, my Lord Duke. Someone will come." She then went out by the same door, which she locked, so that the Duke found himself literally a prisoner. Nevertheless, isolated as he was, we must say that the Duke of Buckingham did not experience an instant of fear. One of the salient points of his character was the search for adventures and a love of romance. Brave, rash, and enterprising, this was not the first time he had risked his life in such attempts. He had learned that the pretended message from Anne of Austria upon the faith of which he had come to Paris was a snare, but instead of regaining England, he had, abusing the position in which he had been placed, declared to the Queen that he would not depart without seeing her. The Queen had at first positively refused, but at length became afraid that the Duke, if exasperated, would commit some folly. She had already decided upon seeing him and urging his immediate departure when, on the very evening of coming to this decision, Madame Bonacieux, who was charged with going to fetch the Duke and conducting him to the Louvre, was abducted. For 2 days no one knew what had become of her, and everything remained in suspense. But once free and placed in communication with Laporte, matters resumed their course, and she accomplished the perilous enterprise which, but for her arrest, would have been executed 3 days earlier. Buckingham, left alone, walked toward a mirror. His Musketeers' uniform became him marvelously. At 35, which was then his age, he passed, with just title, for the handsomest gentleman and the most elegant cavalier of France or England. The favorite of 2 kings, immensely rich, all-powerful in a kingdom which he disordered at his fancy and calmed again at his caprice, George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, had lived one of those fabulous existences which survive in the course of centuries to astonish posterity. Sure of himself, convinced of his own power, certain that the laws which rule other men could not reach him, he went straight to the object he aimed at, even were this object so elevated and so dazzling that it would have been madness for any other even to have contemplated it. It was thus he had succeeded in approaching several times the beautiful and proud Anne of Austria, and in making himself loved by dazzling her. George Villiers put himself before the glass, as we have said, restored the undulations to his beautiful hair, which the weight of his hat had disordered, twisted his mustache, and his heart swelling with joy, happy and proud at being near the moment he had so longed for, he smiled upon himself with pride and hope. At this moment a door concealed in the tapestry opened, and a woman appeared. Buckingham saw this apparition in the glass. He uttered a cry. It was the Queen. Anne of Austria was then 26 or 27 years of age. That is to say, she was in the full splendor of her beauty. Her carriage was that of a queen or a goddess. Her eyes, which cast the brilliancy of emeralds, were perfectly beautiful, and yet were at the same time full of sweetness and majesty. Her mouth was small and rosy, and although her underlip, like that of all princes of the House of Austria, protruded slightly beyond the other, it was eminently lovely in its smile, but as profoundly disdainful in its contempt. Her skin was admired for its velvety softness. Her hands and arms were of surpassing beauty, all the poets of the time singing them as incomparable. Lastly, her hair, which from being light in her youth had become chestnut, and which she wore curled very plainly and with much powder, admirably set off her face, in which the most rigid critic could only have desired a little less rouge, and the most fastidious sculptor a little more fineness in the nose. Buckingham remained for a moment dazzled. Never had Anne of Austria appeared to him so beautiful, amid balls, fetes, or carousals, and as she appeared to him at this moment, dressed in a simple robe of white satin and accompanied by Donna Estefania, the only one of her Spanish women who had not been driven from her by the jealousy of the king or by the persecutions of Richelieu. Anne of Austria took 2 steps forward. Buckingham threw himself at her feet, and before the queen could prevent him, kissed the hem of her robe. "Duke, you already know that it is not I who caused you to be written to." "Yes, yes, madame. Yes, your majesty," cried the duke. "I know that I must have been mad, senseless, to believe that snow would become animated or marble warm. But what then? They who love believe easily in love. Besides, I have lost nothing by this journey because I see you." "Yes," replied Anne, "but you know why and how I see you, because, insensible to all my sufferings, you persist in remaining in a city where, by remaining, you run the risk of your life, and make me run the risk of my honor. I see you to tell you that everything separates us, the depths of the sea, the enmity of kingdoms, the sanctity of vows. It is sacrilege to struggle against so many things, my lord. In short, I see you to tell you that we must never see each other again." "Speak on, madame, speak on, queen," said Buckingham. "The sweetness of your voice covers the harshness of your words. You talk of sacrilege. Why, the sacrilege is the separation of two hearts formed by God for each other." "My lord," cried the queen, "you forget that I have never said that I love you." "But you have never told me that you did not love me, and truly, to speak such words to me would be, on the part of your majesty, too great an ingratitude. For tell me, where can you find a love like mine? A love which neither time nor absence nor despair can extinguish, a love which contents itself with a lost ribbon, a stray look, or a chance word. It is now 3 years, madame, since I saw you for the first time, and during those 3 years I have loved you thus. Shall I tell you each ornament of your toilet? Mark, I see you now. You were seated upon cushions in the Spanish fashion. You wore a robe of green satin embroidered with gold and silver, hanging sleeves knotted upon your beautiful arms, those lovely arms, with large diamonds. You wore a close ruff, a small cap upon your head of the same color as your robe, and in that cap a heron's feather. Hold, I shut my eyes, and I can see you as you were then. I open them again, and I see what you are now, 100 times more beautiful." "What folly!" murmured Anne of Austria, who had not the courage to find fault with the Duke for having so well preserved her portrait in his heart. "What folly to feed a useless passion with such remembrances!" "And upon what, then, must I live? I have nothing but memory. It is my happiness, my treasure, my hope. Every time I see you is a fresh diamond, which I enclose in the casket of my heart. This is the 4th which you have let fall, and I have picked up. For in 3 years, madame, I have only seen you 4 times. The first, which I have described to you. The second, at the mansion of Madame de Chevreuse. The third, in the gardens of Amiens." "Duke," said the queen, blushing, "never speak of that evening." "Oh, let us speak of it. On the contrary, let us speak of it. That is the most happy and brilliant evening of my life. You remember what a beautiful night it was. How soft and perfumed was the air. How lovely the blue heavens and star-enameled sky. Ah, then, madame, I was able for 1 instant to be alone with you. Then you were about to tell me all, the isolation of your life, the griefs of your heart. You leaned upon my arm, upon this, madame. I felt in bending my head towards you, your beautiful hair touch my cheek, and every time that it touched me I trembled from head to foot. Oh, queen, you do not know what felicity from heaven, what joys from paradise are comprised in a moment like that. Take my wealth, my fortune, my glory, all the days I have to live, for such an instant, for a night like that. For that night, madame, that night you loved me. I will swear it." "My lord, yes. It is possible that the influence of the place, the charm of the beautiful evening, the fascination of your look, the 1,000 circumstances, in short, which sometimes unite to destroy a woman, were grouped around me on that fatal evening, but My lord, you saw the queen come to the aid of the woman who faltered. At the first word you dared to utter, at the first freedom to which I had to reply, I called for help. Yes, yes, that is true. And any other love but mine would have sunk beneath this ordeal. But my love came out from it more ardent and more eternal. You believed that you would fly from me by returning to Paris. You believed that I would not dare to quit the treasure over which my master had charged me to watch. What to me were all the treasures in the world, or all the kings of the earth? 8 days after, I was back again, madame. That time you had nothing to say to me. I had risked my life and favor to see you but for a second. I did not even touch your hand, and you pardoned me on seeing me so submissive and so repentant. Yes, but calumny seized upon all those follies in which I took no part, as you well know, my lord. The king, excited by the cardinal, made a terrible clamor. Madame de Verney was driven from me. Poutange was exiled. Madame de Chevreuse fell into disgrace. And when you wished to come back as ambassador to France, the king himself, remember, my lord, the king himself opposed it. Yes, and France is about to pay for her king's refusal with a war. I am not allowed to see you, madame, but you shall every day hear of me. What object, think you, have this expedition to Ray and this league with the Protestants of La Rochelle, which I am projecting? The pleasure of seeing you. I have no hope of penetrating sword in hand to Paris. I know that well, but this war may bring round a peace. This peace will require a negotiator. That negotiator will be me. They will not dare to refuse me then, and I will return to Paris, and will see you again, and will be happy for an instant. Thousands of men, it is true, will have to pay for my happiness with their lives. But what is that to me, provided I see you again? All this is perhaps folly, perhaps insanity, but tell me, what woman has a lover more truly in love? What queen a servant more ardent? My lord, you invoke in your defense things which accuse you more strongly. All these proofs of love which you would give me are almost crimes. Because you do not love me, madame. If you loved me, you would view all this otherwise. If you loved me, that would be too great a happiness, and I should run mad. Madame de Chevreuse was less cruel than you. Holland loved her, and she responded to his love. Madame de Chevreuse was not queen, murmured Anne of Austria, overcome in spite of herself by the expression of so profound a passion. You would love me, then, if you were not queen? Madame, say that you would love me then. I can believe that it is the dignity of your rank alone which makes you cruel to me. I can believe that. Had you been Madame de Chevreuse, poor Buckingham might have hoped. Thanks for those sweet words. Oh, my beautiful sovereign, 100 times thanks. Oh, my lord, you have ill understood, wrongly interpreted. I did not mean to say— Silence, silence, cried the Duke. If I am happy in error, do not have the cruelty to lift me from it. You have told me yourself, madame, that I have been drawn into a snare. I, perhaps, may leave my life in it, for although it may be strange, I have for some time had a presentiment that I should shortly die. And the Duke smiled, with a smile at once sad and charming. Oh, my God! Cried Anne of Austria, with an accent of terror which proved how much greater an interest she took in the Duke than she ventured to tell. I do not tell you this, madame, to terrify you. No, it is even ridiculous for me to name it to you, and, believe me, I take no heed of such dreams. but the words you have just spoken, the hope you have almost given me, will have richly paid all, were it my life."
"Oh, but I," said Anne, "I also, Duke, have had presentiments. I also have had dreams. I dreamed that I saw you lying, bleeding, wounded."
"In the left side, was it not? And with a knife?" interrupted Buckingham.
"Yes, it was so, my lord. It was so, in the left side and with a knife. Who can possibly have told you I had had that dream? I have imparted it to no one but my God, and that in my prayers."
"I ask for no more. You love me, madame. It is enough."
"I love you? I?"
"Yes, yes. Would God send the same dreams to you as to me if you did not love me? Should we have had the same presentiments if our existences did not touch at the heart? You love me, my beautiful queen, and you will weep for me."
"Oh, my God, my God!" cried Anne of Austria. "This is more than I can bear. In the name of heaven, Duke, leave me. Go. I do not know whether I love you or love you not, but what I know is that I will not be perjured. Take pity on me, then, and go. Oh, if you are stuck in France, if you die in France, if I could imagine that your love for me was the cause of your death, I could not console myself. I should run mad. Depart, then, depart. I implore you."
"Oh, how beautiful you are thus! Oh, how I love you!" said Buckingham.
"Go, go, I implore you, and return hereafter. Come back as ambassador, come back as minister, come back surrounded with guards who will defend you, with servants who will watch over you, and then I shall no longer fear for your days, and I shall be happy in seeing you."
"Oh, is this true, what you say?"
"Yes."
"Oh, then some pledge of your indulgence, some object which came from you, and may remind me that I have not been dreaming, something you have worn, and that I may wear in my return, a ring, a necklace, a chain."
"Will you depart? Will you depart, if I give you that you demand?"
"Yes."
"This very instant?"
"Yes."
"You will leave France? You will return to England?"
"I will. I swear to you."
"Wait, then wait."
Anne of Austria re-entered her apartment and came out again almost immediately holding a rosewood casket in her hand, with her cipher encrusted with gold.
"Here, my lord, here," said she. "Keep this in memory of me."
Buckingham took the casket and fell a second time on his knees.
"You have promised me to go," said the queen.
"And I keep my word. Your hand, madame, your hand, and I depart." Anne of Austria stretched forth her hand, closing her eyes and leaning with the other upon Estefania, for she felt that her strength was about to fail her. Buckingham pressed his lips passionately to that beautiful hand, and then rising, said, "Within 6 months, if I am not dead, I shall have seen you again, madame, even if I have to overturn the world." And faithful to the promise he had made, he rushed out of the apartment. In the corridor, he met Madame Bonacieux, who waited for him, and who, with the same precautions and the same good luck, conducted him out of the Louvre. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13 of the D'Artagnan Romances, Volume 1, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas, translated by William Robson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Monsieur Bonacieux. There was in all this, as may have been observed, one personage concerned, of whom, notwithstanding his precarious position, we have appeared to take but very little notice. This personage was Monsieur Bonacieux, the respectable martyr of the political and amorous intrigues which entangled themselves so nicely together at this gallant and chivalric period. Fortunately, the reader may remember, or may not remember. Fortunately, we have promised not to lose sight of him. The officers who arrested him conducted him straight to the Bastille, where he passed trembling before a party of soldiers who were loading their muskets. Thence, introduced into a half-subterranean gallery, he became, on the part of those who had brought him, the object of the grossest insults and the harshest treatment. The officers perceived that they had not to deal with a gentleman, and they treated him like a very peasant. At the end of half an hour or thereabouts, a clerk came to put an end to his tortures, but not to his anxiety, by giving the order to conduct Monsieur Bonacieux to the chamber of examination. Ordinarily, prisoners were interrogated in their cells, but they did not do so with Monsieur Bonacieux. 2 guards attended the mercer who made him traverse a court and enter a corridor in which were 3 sentinels, opened a door, and pushed him unceremoniously into a low room where the only furniture was a table, a chair, and a commissary. The commissary was seated in the chair and was writing at the table. The 2 guards led the prisoner toward the table, and upon a sign from the commissary, drew back so far as to be unable to hear anything. The commissary, who had till this time held his head down over his papers, looked up to see what sort of person he had to do with. This commissary was a man of very repulsive mien, with a pointed nose, with yellow and salient cheekbones, with eyes small but keen and penetrating, and an expression of countenance resembling at once the polecat and the fox. His head, supported by a long and flexible neck, issued from his large black robe, balancing itself with a motion very much like that of the tortoise thrusting his head out of his shell. He began by asking Monsieur Bonacieux his name, age, condition, and abode. The accused replied that his name was Jacques-Michel Bonacieux, that he was 51 years old, a retired mercer, and lived Rue des Fossoyeurs, No. 14. The commissary then, instead of continuing to interrogate him, made him a long speech upon the danger there is for an obscure citizen to meddle with public matters. He complicated his exordium by an exposition in which he painted the power and the deeds of the cardinal, that incomparable minister, that conqueror of past ministers, that example for ministers to come, deeds and power which none could thwart with impunity. After this second part of his discourse, fixing his hawk's eye upon poor Bonacieux, he bade him reflect upon the gravity of his situation. The reflections of the mercer were already made. He cursed the instant when Monsieur Laporte formed the idea of marrying him to his goddaughter, and particularly the moment when that goddaughter had been received as Lady of the Linen to Her Majesty. At bottom, the character of Monsieur Bonacieux was one of profound selfishness mixed with sordid avarice, the whole seasoned with extreme cowardice. The love with which his young wife had inspired him was a secondary sentiment, and was not strong enough to contend with the primitive feelings we have just enumerated. Bonacieux indeed reflected on what had just been said to him. "But, Monsieur Commissary," said he calmly, "believe that I know and appreciate more than anybody the merit of the incomparable eminence by whom we have the honor to be governed." "Indeed?" asked the commissary with an air of doubt. "If that is really so, how came you in the Bastille?" "How I came there, or rather why I am there," replied Bonacieux, "that is entirely impossible for me to tell you, because I don't know myself, but to a certainty it is not for having, knowingly at the least, disobliged Monsieur the Cardinal." "You must nevertheless have committed a crime, since you are here and are accused of high treason." "Of high treason?" cried Bonacieux, terrified. "Of high treason? How is it possible for a poor mercer, who detests Huguenots and who abhors Spaniards, to be accused of high treason? Consider, monsieur, the thing is absolutely impossible." "Monsieur Bonacieux," said the commissary, looking at the accused as if his little eyes had the faculty of reading to the very depths of hearts. "You have a wife?" "Yes, monsieur," replied the mercer in a tremble, feeling that it was at this point affairs were likely to become perplexing. "That is to say, I had one." "What? You had one? What have you done with her, then, if you have her no longer?" "They have abducted her, monsieur." "They have abducted her? Ha!" Bonacieux inferred from this "ah" that the affair grew more and more intricate. "They have abducted her," added the commissary. "And do you know the man who has committed this deed?" "I think I know him." "Who is he?" "Remember that I affirm nothing, monsieur the commissary, and that I only suspect." "Whom do you suspect? Come, answer freely." Monsieur Bonacieux was in the greatest perplexity possible. Had he better deny everything or tell everything? By denying all, it might be suspected that he must know too much to avow. By confessing all, he might prove his good will. He decided, then, to tell all. "I suspect," said he, "a tall, dark man of lofty carriage, who has the air of a great lord. He has followed us several times, as I think, when I have waited for my wife at the wicket of the Louvre to escort her home." The commissary now appeared to experience a little uneasiness. "And his name?" said he. "Oh, as to his name, I know nothing about it, but if I were ever to meet him, I should recognize him in an instant. I will answer for it, were he among 1,000 persons." The face of the commissary grew still darker. "You should recognize him among 1,000, say you?" continued he. "That is to say," cried Bonacieux, who saw he had taken a false step. "That is to say—" "You have answered that you should recognize him," said the commissary. "That is all very well, and enough for today. Before we proceed further, someone must be informed that you know the ravisher of your wife." "But I have not told you that I know him," cried Bonacieux in despair. "I told you, on the contrary—" "Take away the prisoner," said the commissary to the two guards. "Where must we place him?" demanded the chief. "In a dungeon." "Which?" "Good Lord, in the first one handy, provided that it is safe," said the commissary with an indifference which penetrated poor Bonacieux with horror. "Alas, alas," said he to himself, "misfortune is over my head. My wife must have committed some frightful crime. They believe me her accomplice, and will punish me with her. She must have spoken. She must have confessed everything. A woman is so weak. A dungeon, the first he comes to. That's it. A night is soon past, and tomorrow to the wheel, to the gallows. Oh, my God, have pity on me." Without listening the least in the world to the lamentations of Monsieur Bonacieux, lamentations to which, besides, they must have been pretty well accustomed, the two guards took the prisoner each by an arm and led him away, while the commissary wrote a letter in haste and dispatched it by an officer in waiting. Bonacieux could not close his eyes, not because his dungeon was so very disagreeable, but because his uneasiness was so great. He sat all night on his stool, starting at the least noise, and when the first rays of the sun penetrated into his chamber, the dawn itself appeared to him to have taken funereal tints. All at once he heard his bolts drawn and made a terrified bound. He believed they were come to conduct him to the scaffold, so that when he saw merely and simply, instead of the executioner he expected, only his commissary of the preceding evening, attended by his clerk, he was ready to embrace them both. "Your affair has become more complicated since yesterday evening, my good man, and I advise you to tell the whole truth, for your repentance alone can remove the anger of the cardinal."
"Why, I am ready to tell everything," cried Bonacieux. "At least, all that I know. Interrogate me, I entreat you."
"Where is your wife in the first place?"
"Why, did I not tell you she had been stolen from me?"
"Yes, but yesterday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, thanks to you, she escaped."
"My wife escaped?" cried Bonacieux. "Oh, unfortunate creature! Monsieur, if she has escaped, it is not my fault, I swear."
"What business had you, then, to go into the chamber of Monsieur d'Artagnan, your neighbor, with whom you had a long conference during the day?"
"Ah, yes, Monsieur Commissary, yes, that is true, and I confess that I was in the wrong. I did go to Monsieur d'Artagnan's."
"What was the aim of that visit?"
"To beg him to assist me in finding my wife. I believed I had a right to endeavor to find her. I was deceived, as it appears, and I ask your pardon."
"And what did Monsieur d'Artagnan reply?"
"Monsieur d'Artagnan promised me his assistance, but I soon found out that he was betraying me."
"You impose upon justice. Monsieur d'Artagnan made a compact with you, and in virtue of that compact put to flight the police, who had arrested your wife, and has placed her beyond reach."
"Monsieur d'Artagnan has abducted my wife? Come now, what are you telling me?"
"Fortunately, Monsieur d'Artagnan is in our hands, and you shall be confronted with him."
"By my faith, I ask no better," cried Bonacieux. "I shall not be sorry to see the face of an acquaintance."
"Bring in Monsieur d'Artagnan,"
said the commissary to the guards. The two guards led in Athos.
"Monsieur d'Artagnan,"
said the commissary, addressing Athos,
"declare all that passed yesterday between you and Monsieur."
"But,"
cried Bonacieux,
"this is not Monsieur d'Artagnan whom you show me."
"What? Not Monsieur d'Artagnan?"
exclaimed the commissary.
"Not the least in the world,"
replied Bonacieux.
"What is this gentleman's name?"
asked the commissary.
"I cannot tell you. I don't know him."
"How? You don't know him?"
"No."
"Did you ever see him?"
"Yes, I have seen him, but I don't know what he calls himself."
"Your name?"
replied the commissary.
"Athos,"
replied the Musketeer.
"But that is not a man's name. That is the name of a mountain,"
cried the poor questioner, who began to lose his head.
"That is my name,"
said Athos quietly.
"But you said that your name was D'Artagnan."
"Who? I?"
"Yes, you."
"Somebody said to me, 'You are Monsieur d'Artagnan.' I answered, 'You think so?' My guards exclaimed that they were sure of it. I did not wish to contradict them. Besides, I might be deceived."
"Monsieur, you insult the majesty of justice."
"Not at all," said Athos calmly.
"You are Monsieur d'Artagnan."
You see, monsieur, that you say it again." "But I tell you, Monsieur Commissary," cried Bonacieux in his turn, "there is not the least doubt about the matter. Monsieur d'Artagnan is my tenant, although he does not pay me my rent, and even better on that account I ought to know him. Monsieur d'Artagnan is a young man, scarcely 19 or 20, and this gentleman must be 30 at least. Monsieur d'Artagnan is in Monsieur Dessessart's guards, and this gentleman is in the company of Monsieur de Tréville's Musketeers. Look at his uniform, Monsieur Commissary. Look at his uniform."
"That's true," murmured the commissary. "Pardieu, that's true."
At this moment the door was opened quickly, and a messenger introduced by one of the gatekeepers of the Bastille gave a letter to the commissary.
"Ah, unhappy woman!"
cried the commissary.
"How? What do you say? Of whom do you speak? It is not of my wife, I hope."
"On the contrary, it is of her. Yours is a pretty business."
"But,"
said the agitated mercer,
"do me the pleasure, monsieur, to tell me how my own proper affair can become worse by anything my wife does while I am in prison."
"Because that which she does is part of a plan concerted between you, of an infernal plan."
"I swear to you, Monsieur Commissary, that you are in the profoundest error, that I know nothing in the world about what my wife had to do, that I am entirely a stranger to what she has done, and that if she has committed any follies, I renounce her, I abjure her, I curse her."
"Bah!" said Athos to the commissary.
"If you have no more need of me, send me somewhere. Your Monsieur Bonacieux is very tiresome."
The commissary designated by the same gesture Athos and Bonacieux.
"Let them be guarded more closely than ever."
"And yet,"
said Athos with his habitual calmness,
"if it be Monsieur d'Artagnan whom is concerned in the matter, I do not perceive how I can take his place."
"Do as I bade you,"
cried the commissary,
"and preserve absolute secrecy. You understand?"
Athos shrugged his shoulders and followed his guards silently while Monsieur Bonacieux uttered lamentations enough to break the heart of a tiger. They locked the mercer in the same dungeon where he had passed the night and left him to himself during the day. Bonacieux wept all day, like a true mercer, not being at all a military man, as he himself informed us. In the evening, about 9 o'clock, at the moment he had made up his mind to go to bed, he heard steps in the corridor. These steps drew near to his dungeon. The door was thrown open, and the guards appeared. "Follow me," said an officer who came up behind the guards.
"Follow you?"
cried Bonacieux.
"Follow you at this hour? Where, my God?"
"Where we have orders to lead you."
"But that is not an answer."
"It is nevertheless the one we can give."
"Oh, my God, my God!"
murmured the poor mercer.
"Now, indeed, I am lost."
And he followed the guards who came for him, mechanically and without resistance. He passed along the same corridor as before, crossed one court, then a second side of a building. At length, at the gate of the entrance court, he found a carriage surrounded by 4 guards on horseback. They made him enter this carriage. The officer placed himself by his side. The door was locked, and they were left in a rolling prison. The carriage was put in motion as slowly as a funeral car. Through the closely fastened windows, the prisoner could perceive the houses and the pavement. That was all. But true Parisian as he was, Bonacieux could recognize every street by the milestones, the signs, and the lamps. At the moment of arriving at St. Paul, the spot where such as were condemned at the Bastille were executed, he was near fainting and crossed himself twice. He thought the carriage was about to stop there. The carriage, however, passed on. Farther on, a still greater terror seized him on passing by the cemetery of Saint-Jean, where state criminals were buried. One thing, however, reassured him.
He remembered that before they were buried, their heads were generally cut off, and he felt that his head was still on his shoulders. But when he saw the carriage take the way to La Grève, when he perceived the pointed roof of the Hôtel de Ville, and the carriage passed under the arcade, he believed it was over with him. He wished to confess to the officer, and upon his refusal uttered some pitiable cries, that the officer told him that if he continued to deafen him thus, he should put a gag in his mouth. This measure somewhat reassured Bonacieux. If they meant to execute him at La Grève, it could scarcely be worth while to gag him, as they had nearly reached the place of execution. Indeed, the carriage crossed the fatal spot without stopping. There remained then no other place to fear but the Traitor's Cross. The carriage was taking the direct road to it. This time there was no longer any doubt. It was at the Traitor's Cross that lesser criminals were executed. Bonacieux had flattered himself in believing himself worthy of St. Paul or of the Place de Grève. It was at the Traitor's Cross that his journey and his destiny were about to end. He could not yet see that dreadful cross, but he felt somehow as if it were coming to meet him. When he was within 20 paces of it, he heard a noise of people, and the carriage stopped. This was more than poor Bonacieux could endure. Depressed as he was by the successive emotions which he had experienced, he uttered a feeble groan which might have been taken for the last sigh of a dying man, and fainted. End of chapter 13.
I hope you laughed out loud and it made your day happy. I particularly loved, I did not preset this for you, Athos's name is indeed a mountain. It's off the Aegean Sea in northern Greece. And and I loved Athos's total deadpan of his kind of Jesus moment where, you know, people used to say, oh, you say you're the Son of God, and Jesus would say, well, that's what you say. So here it's, well, you're D'Artagnan. Well, that's what you said. I didn't say that. And then in the newer translation, it reads, it is my name, Athos said calmly, but you said your name was D'Artagnan. I? Yes, you. That is to say, someone said to me, you are Monsieur D'Artagnan. I replied, you think so? My guards shouted that they were sure of it, and I did not want to vex them. Besides, I might have been mistaken. That last punchline, I may have been mistaken about who I am, is such a millennial joke. I love the humor in this book. I hope you are enjoying it as well. And just to send you off on a happy note as well, we will end the episode with the entire scene, I think it's about 6 minutes long, from The Importance of Being Earnest with Lady Bracknell and Ernest. Although he's not in his earnest guise at this time, he is still John Worthing at the point that the comedy routine takes place. But I did want to remind you to send me ideas for Christmas stories. The sooner I can preset them, the better for everyone. There's a link in the show notes to the form that you can fill out, or you can just email me, heather@craftlit.com, and we will get that info. And by the time this drops, we will have had our first Patreon book night. So very excited about that. July will have the next movie night for people who have pledged at that level. And we've already put a poll for the next movie in the Patreon messages conversating area. And we'll also do it over on Discord as well. Because I know more and more people are kind of gradually, I think once we hit a certain number of episodes of a book, a lot of people start to listen then. So I am seeing people coming in, which I totally understand. I don't blame you for hoarding episodes so that you can listen to more of the book at one time. Also, don't forget, you can call and share your thoughts about the book at 206-350-1642. Or if you're outside the United States and don't really feel like calling long distance, you can go to linktr.ee. So it's Linktree, but with the EE as the com part of the URL. Then /CraftLit channel. And on that page, you will have access to all of the links to everywhere, all in one place. And that'll make it that much easier for you. The last piece of information is by the time this episode drops, I will have reopened my Etsy store. And one of the things that I have in there is a set of planner pages that have been designed specifically for people with ADHD brains, people who have trouble breaking down goals, goal setting, seeing all the steps that are going to be required to get something done, as well as not being so good about time and things like that, and interruptions, specifically interruptions. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much. I know this was a long one. We're going to play you out with Lady Bracknell. Have a great time. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Now to minor matters. Are your parents living?
I have lost both my parents.
To lose one parent, Mr. Worthing, may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness. Who was your father? He was evidently a man of some wealth. Was he born in what the radical papers call the purple of commerce, or did he rise from the ranks of the aristocracy?
I'm afraid I really don't know. The fact is, Lady Bracknell, I said I had lost my parents. It would perhaps be nearer the truth to say that my parents seem to have lost me. I don't really know who I am by birth. I was found.
Found?
The late Mr. Thomas Cardew, an old gentleman of a very kindly and charitable disposition, found me and gave me the name of Worthing because he happened to have a first-class ticket for Worthing in his pocket at the time. Worthing is a place in Sussex. It is a seaside resort.
Where did the charitable gentleman who had a first-class ticket for this seaside resort find you?
In a handbag.
A handbag?
Yes, Lady Bracknell, I was in a handbag. A somewhat large, black, leather handbag with handles to it. An ordinary handbag, in fact.
In what locality did this Mr. James, or Thomas Cardew, come across this ordinary handbag?
In the cloakroom at Victoria Station. It was given to him in mistake for his own.
The cloakroom at Victoria Station?
Yes, the Brighton line.
The line is immaterial. Mr. Worthing, I confess I feel somewhat bewildered by what you have just told me. To be born, or at any rate bred in a handbag, whether it had handles or not, seems to me to display a contempt for the ordinary decencies of family life that reminds one of the worst excesses of the French Revolution. And I presume you know what that unfortunate movement led to. As for the particular locality in which the handbag was found, a cloakroom at a railway station might serve to conceal a social indiscretion, has probably indeed been used for that purpose before now, but it could hardly be regarded as an assured basis for a recognized position in good society.
May I ask you then what you would advise me to do? I need hardly tell you that I would do anything in the world to ensure Gwendolyn's happiness.
I would strongly advise you, Mr. Worthing, to try and acquire some relations as soon as possible, and to make a definite effort to produce at any rate one parent of either sex before the season is quite over.
Well, I don't see how I could possibly manage to do that. I can produce the handbag at any moment. It's in my dressing room at home. I really think that should satisfy you, Lady Bracknell.
Me, sir? What has it to do with me? You can hardly imagine that I and Lord Bracknell would dream of allowing our only daughter, a girl brought up with the utmost care, to marry into a cloakroom and form an alliance with a parcel. Good morning, Mr. Worthing.
A big thanks to all the CraftLit listeners who support the show by being a premium audio member via craftlit.com/premium or via patreon.com/craftlit.
Your support for the show is what's kept us going since 2006. If you feel like getting free audio pretty much every week, please consider supporting the show by heading over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledging what you feel the show is worth to you. If you can't support the show that way, consider leaving a review at iTunes or at our facebook.com/craftlit page, or follow @craftlit on Twitter and share the show with your followers too. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.